Hello Summoners, and welcome to another episode of ProGuides Best Champions to Main, now on patch 10.24. These champions are all about high performance with low ban rates that are unlikely to get nerfed in the immediate future. The most reliable picks in the game that are the most worthy of investing time in. But before all that, today's question of the day is, what champ do you think is the best hyper carry in the game right now? With the new item system, marksmen as a whole aren't doing too great, so the traditional 6-item hyper carries like Jinx and Kog'Maw aren't really able to shine, even at full build. For me, I think Echo is a pretty good contender. At 6 items, I've seen him literally one-shot champs just with the damage from his E, Night Harvester and Lichbane. So be sure to let us know your answer in the comments down below. Oh, and before we start the video, I want to let you guys know that we're having a bit of a Black Friday special over at ProGuides.com, which gets you 50% off our memberships. Use the promo code BLACKFRIDAY to redeem this discount. With that said, let's hop into the video. Starting things out in the top lane, we have KLED. His first few levels are a bit awkward and bumpy thanks to long cooldowns, but once you gain a few levels, you'll start to pick up steam and become a total bully. Right away, one thing that makes KLED so good is his Q. If you're going to win trades with him, you have to land it, and if you do land it and get off the second portion of the ability, the 60% healing reduction is huge, since most top laners either itemize for or have innate healing. His W is somewhat of a wonky ability to get used to, but once you learn to trade around its availability, you'll just see how oppressive it can be. One tip though, when you're ready to level W, don't. Instead, sit on the skill level up point, and once you hit a Q, then level up W, so you don't waste its cooldown beforehand on minions. Your E is great for closing the gap in a trade, but don't just instantly use the second cast. Instead, hold it until your opponent uses flash or a dash to get over a wall, and then use it just to follow them over. Remember, only the second cast can go over terrain. And last, KLED's ult has a couple of uses. The most obvious is as a way to start up team fights. Not only does it send you flying in with a big shield to soak up damage and jump onto a target, but the movement speed it grants can completely enable certain team comps. It's especially good if you have a champ like Olaf or Hecarim that can really use the movement speed to run down the enemy carries. But aside from beefing you up and starting fights, it's also really good to use it to sneak a roam to bottom lane. Just walk in behind your teammates and ult in to pull off a lane gank. Then you can use your TP to go back top without losing out on too much farm. While we recommended Alacrity in our rune choices, if the enemy has some CC, you should definitely swap to Tenacity. Our second pick for the top lane is MAOKAI. Tanks have been doing well since the start of the preseason, and the tree is one of the best. He's one of the few tanks that can force trades hard in lane, and he can easily itemize both damage and resistances at the same time against most lane opponents, meaning that he naturally kills them while taking little to no damage, and it just gets better for him as the game goes on. His passive gives some nice sustain in lane, but it's definitely more OP in teamfights, where the potential plethora of spellcasts can give constant healing. Q is your bread and butter trading tool as well as your AoE pushing ability. While MAOKAI does have a relatively low skill floor, his Q is definitely a good way to express how well you understand the champ. Positioning behind an enemy can let you bump them towards your teammates, and if you can have the reaction speed, you can also use it to disrupt jumps. With good positioning, you can even keep that pesky Zac from engaging on your team. W is what makes MAOKAI such a consistent pick. The point-and-click route can lead to some game-winning catches by flashing on an enemy carry that steps even an inch too far forward. It can also be used to dodge abilities and auto-attacks, making it good when trading aggressively or just to dodge incoming CC when being ganked. E-saplings can get some bush control in lane and also serve as some relatively high damage wards both in and out of lane phase. Just a single sapling in a bush can deal a good chunk of damage to enemies that have no choice but to walk in to get vision. They can even buy time as enemies struggle to kite them while your team does dragon. Your ult isn't as straightforward as press R go in. It actually takes a bit of practice to learn how to use it right. If you have a flank, you can definitely use it from an angle that will catch the enemy off guard, but another option is to actually use it after you start the fight for added disruption. Think of it like this. If the enemy sees the ult, they can line up behind the tank, with the other 4 members being untouched. But if you use it after you flash route a carry, the enemy team won't be able to stack in time, and you're more likely to hit 2 or 3 members instead of just 1. Like I said, MAOKAI is easy to pick up, but as we've talked about, all of his abilities have some really neat little tricks that you can really use to help carry your games. If you want some help taking a seemingly simple champ like MAOKAI up to the next level, be sure to visit us at ProGuides.com, where you can use our challenger level coaches to help you learn it all. Our last top lane of this video is SION. He's a weird mix of extremely tanky and a lot of damage. In fact, with this build, you can practically one-shot squishy targets that you catch out with a full damage ult. Your Q serves many purposes. In lane, you can use it to follow up on a successful E slow, hitting your opponent for a huge chunk of damage and a stun, which then leads to an even better trade as you walk up for an auto or two and pop your W on them. But the ability is really good when someone, or if you're really lucky, all 5 players on the enemy team face check an area. Whether it's at a level 1 fight or just a bad face check at late game, anyone walking into a fully charged SION Q is about to get seriously messed up. And if SION has his team ready to follow up, whoever he catches is pretty much guaranteed to be dead. W's shield is great for soaking up damage in lane and in team fights, but the really broken part of the ability is actually the passive. The stacking HP from farming is what makes SION so disgustingly tanky as a juggernaut, and allows him to build into more bruiserish items that take full advantage of that innate tankiness, like Titanic and Sterax. As I said earlier, E is great for setting up your Q, as hitting an opponent applies a really annoying slow that makes it basically impossible to dodge whatever comes next. The armor shred it does is an additional bonus that helps the follow-up Q to smack even harder. Your ult is somewhat similar to KLED's, but with some trade-offs. While it doesn't shield you or give your allies movement speed, the amount of damage and CC it provides is insane. Even with this tanky build we have for you, I guarantee that landing a full speed ult on a carry at late game will lead to you practically assassinating them if they don't have allies nearby, since they are forced to watch as you wind up a fully charged Q and bring down your wrath on them. As a general rule, everyone in League wants to farm, but it's especially important to keep farming with SION, since it directly makes you tankier due to the aforementioned W passive. Moving into the jungle, our first pick is SKARNER. He's been a really strong pick for a long time, and that trend is continuing into the preseason. But really, no one is picking or banning him, so jump on the train before they do. While Righteous Glory was a decent item on SKARNER, it wasn't something you could build first. The addition of Turbo Chem Tank gives him a rushable item that pushes his catch potential to the max, while also providing useful stats and a passive when the active isn't available. The first lesson for SKARNER players is to play around your spires. Fighting on a spire you own versus fighting without the buff is night and day, as you'll realise just how much they take you from average to OP. The mana regen for Q spam and attack speed gives great jungle clear strength, while the attack speed and movement speed enable you to fight champs. You can even duel most champs as long as the fight is on your terms. Your Q's consistent AoE gives you a quick and healthy jungle clear and gives you a good chunk of damage when it comes to fighting other champs. W's shield helps to soak up some damage, but the main use of the ability is to speed up the catching out enemies, and with Turbo Chem Tank's active and blue smite, pretty much no champ in the game can escape your ult without a QSS. Despite the ult being the flashiest part of your kit, E is actually the majority of your CC. The AoE slow is nice, but don't tunnel on just stunning on target. Instead, take the time to chase down and stun every mark champ you can. All of those stuns can really add up. When it's finally time to use your ult, make sure you're picking the targets right. You don't have to always just dive for the ADC either. It can be used to make a catch on an out-of-play support or to peel for your own carries. Just think about it before you tunnel too hard on one target. You know, I never thought we'd have a day when UDYR would show up on our top list, but here we are. Despite being a champ with nothing but modified auto attacks to offer, with Stridebreaker and Blade of the Ruined King, he's actually pretty strong right now. UDYR isn't exactly complicated, but it is important to keep swapping your stances to keep passives stacked up to 3. Your Q is going to be basically all of your damage, and since you're building to carry, you'll be maxing it first. If you're ever cheesing a bush, make sure to activate Q once so you're sitting on the bleed to apply it, and then immediately press Q and auto attack again to apply another stack. Unlike most dot effects, instead of just refreshing the timer on the debuff and getting rid of the damage from the first application, this will immediately do all of the remaining damage from that first Q auto. W's shield gives you a bit of extra tankiness, and when you consider how much you spam it, that little bit adds up to a lot of it over time. On top of that, it also heals you, so it gives a lot of effective HP as long as you weave in W casts. As far as abilities go, your E is how you stick to targets, as the burst of speed lets you catch up, with your next attack stunning. When playing full tank UDYR, you want to run around slapping each target to tag them with stuns, but with this damage heavy build, you'll just want to run in with Bear Stance to stun a priority target, and then swap to Tiger Stance to rip them to shreds. You won't be messing with Phoenix Stance with this build, so we won't really be going into it too much, but there are some fun AP builds you can try if you want to mix things up. Just be warned that it doesn't carry as consistently or as hard as the regular AD Tiger build. Our last jungler is Poppy. She was in the last patch's 3 mains video as a top, but she's proven to be no slouch in the jungle either. What's interesting about this pick is that she's actually performs best with offensive runes, taking Dark Harvest as her keystone, but building full tank in the item department. Passive shield adds a bit of sustain to your clear, with the empowered damage giving just a bit more oomph to your ganks. Sometimes you'll get an extremely satisfying Buckler auto plus Dark Harvest proc to finish off a fleeing opponent. Trust me, it feels so good. Q gives a really quick and healthy jungle clear and serves the majority of your damage when fighting champs. To get the full effect, you'll want to wall stun someone with your E first and then use Q, giving you a better chance of landing the second part of Q's damage. On top of the decent base damage, it also does damage based on your opponent's max HP, making you equally suited to assassinating squishies or dueling bruisers and tanks. W's ability to block dashes is what makes you so potent at pulling off ganks. To use it well, come in from an angle behind your opponent, cut off their escape route, use W to block their any attempt at dashing to safety, and then use E to slam them into the wall. If an opponent doesn't have a flash up, this is usually a pretty sure way to pull off a successful gank. Aside from its use in ganking, E can also be a quick way to make a game-winning catch. If a carry, especially a flashless or an immobile one, steps near a wall, a quick flash E can make them a free pick for your team and lead to free objectives or even a push for the win. In teamfights where there's no wall to stun your opponents against, you can still use it to dive onto carries, but you can also reserve it as a budget way to peel for your own carries. But that's really just the last resort, as Poppy does much better diving and disrupting the enemy backline. Poppy's ult is the hardest part of her kit to master, as it has a lot of applications in any given game. You can quick tap it to interrupt channels or just as extra CC for making catches, but the wind up can be great for peeling disengaging fights, turning a 5v5 into a 5v3, or for knocking away the enemy team to ensure they can't contest Dragon or Baron. Rumble started to fall off just a bit toward the end of the season. He wasn't bad, but he definitely wasn't as OP as he was a few months ago. These new items have renewed his strength, and he's a top tier pick now. One slight learning curve for picking up Rumble is learning to manage his unique heat mechanic. But once you learn to juggle spell cooldowns and stay in the orange bar for most of your trades, you'll be melting your enemies' faces off. That's in a literal sense. Q is the majority of your damage in both trades and clearing minion waves, and against the melee mid laners that you're currently dominating in the meta, you'll be able to do both since your flamethrower covers a pretty decent area. Since you don't have to worry about mana, you can spam the ability to your heart's content, easily outshoving pretty much every other mid in the game. While Q does tons of damage, W lets you mitigate your opponent's attempts at trading back, with the movement speed helping you to dodge skill shots or chase the other laner down. E adds some more damage to your combo when trading, but the main function of the ability is to slow your opponent so you can stick to them for your full Q duration. Generally, your trading pattern will be to wait until you have both E charges available, W at your opponent, try to land both E's for that fat stacking slow, and then roast them away with your ult. All of your abilities are pretty low cooldown, so you can rinse and repeat pretty often and easily dominate the lane. The only difficult part of his kit for some players is learning to cast his ult properly, but once you do, a well-placed equalizer can completely melt an entire team. On top of the disgusting damage, the slow makes it so enemies have to trudge their way through it, and makes them easy pickings for the rest of your team. GALIO seems to always be running different runes these last few months. We've cycled through Aftershock, Predator, Unsealed Spellbook, even Phase Rush, and now it seems like Electrocute is the flavour of the month. With your passive and Q, you have good pushing power, and once you finish Rocket Belt, that upgrades to instant wave clear, should you want to use the active for that. GALIO's strong point is his ability to set up ganks and fight skirmishes with his jungler. The combination of Nimbus Cloak and Rocket Belt gives him tons of movement speed, and his chain CC combined with his pretty high burst damage makes him possibly the best 2v2 champ in mid lane. When looking to engage, it's pretty straightforward. Dash in with E and follow up with Taunt. If your opponent tries to flash away, your Nimbus Cloak flash is simply better, and you shouldn't have trouble catching them out. In teamfights, W's damage reduction along with Demonic Embrace and Zhonya's make GALIO a pretty decent pseudo-tank, despite him also dealing some pretty insane damage. GALIO's ult may have a long cooldown, but when it's up, timing it well can have an absolutely massive impact on the outcome of a fight. For one, it can be used to follow up on an ally's engage, raging the enemy team unable to fight back as they scramble to escape the huge AoE knockup and damage to come. Alternatively, it can be used as a form of disengage. If the enemy has a diver like Vi or Hecarim and you ult one of your backliners being dove, the rest of the enemy team has to wait out your ult before they can move in to follow up. The last use is for the massive AoE shield it grants. The shield covers all allies in its circle and can completely nullify even some of the biggest nukes in the game, like Vlad or Karthus ults, and can be crucial in shutting down Katarina by denying her a reset. While Annie is one of the oldest champs in League, she certainly doesn't feel outdated. In fact, her simple but strong kit makes carrying with her full prof once you get the strats down. Her passive makes you a mage that can hard engage fights, but it's not like you're just a utility bot. You also have some of the highest burst in the game, so if a squishy carry makes a single misstep, you can just wipe them out. Q gives you super easy last hitting, as the cooldown and mana refund means you basically never have to miss farm to tower. And since it's point and click, you should never miss a stun when receiving a gank from your jungler. W gives you some AoE damage to thin out the wave's HP, setting you up for the aforementioned Q farming. There's also a neat trick where you can W flash, which is actually a more for sure way of hitting an AoE stun than flash tibbers, since players with quick reflexes can actually flash away from that. Your E gives you a crucial boost to movement speed to you and an ally, giving you a way to close the gap and catch out enemies that would otherwise be out of range. And since it shields and gives your ally a Thornmail effect, it synergizes super well with bruisers and tanks that are diving into the fray. Tibbers rounds out your kit and gives you a huge presence in teamfights. While I did say the W flash is more guaranteed than looking for an instant catch, Tibbers covers a larger area, and hitting a multi-target Tibber stun all but guarantees an easily won teamfight for your team. Annie is mechanically pretty simple, so mastering her means knowing when and how to play for lane prio, when to roam, and making the right decisions in teamfights. The good news is all of these concepts are easy to teach, so if you want to speed up the process, spend less time figuring things out on your own, then just head over to ProGuides.com so our elite coaches can get you on the fast track to carrying your games. Moving on to the bot lane, her mobile kit makes her one of the ADCs that can more easily deal with the high damage, fast-paced games we're seeing so far in the preseason, and her passively scaling attack range gives her a way to dish out the damage in late game teamfights. Her Q is a huge attack steroid and gives her insane late game hypercarry potential. Make sure you're fighting only when it's up, as it is a crucial part of making sure you get your E fully stacked, especially early game when you don't have attack speed from items. Your W gives you a way to navigate teamfights, and it's not as simple as hopping in and hopping out of the middle of things. Once it gets to the late game, you can use it to position over walls using your superior range to let you attack from a completely unreachable distance. While your range late game lets you hypercarry with your autos, E is what carries your early game, and it's what makes you so snowbally. When paired with a kill lane support, all you need is a BF sword and an aggressive engage to 100 to 0 any non-tank in the bot lane, as long as you get your grenade fully stacked out. Aside from fighting champs, it's also what makes you such an insane demolisher, and if your lane opponents sit on the tower, they're forced to take extra damage from the explosion while you're not even hitting them. Your ult can be a massive finisher, especially early game when your burst is especially potent. After stacking up your grenade to 3 hits, you can use ult to deal a huge amount of damage, also applying a 4th stack and exploding your opponent. On the defensive, if your jumps don't keep you safe enough, your ult gives you a pretty massive self-peeling ability. Our second bot laner may not be a marksman, but he's definitely capable of carrying games. While it's not completely impossible to play him with an enchanter, you really want to play SWAIN with an aggressive support that provides CC to take advantage of his passive. Of course, playing bot lane is better with a duo queue partner, but in SWAIN's case that's especially true. So try to find a friend that enjoys playing champs like Leona or Nautilus to climb with. His Q is pretty simple and serves as his consistent damage source and wave clear. W can be used to scout out the enemy jungle or check for ganks, especially in the lane bushes, but if you're trying to use it offensively in lane, bear in mind it's too slow to simply cast it at your opponent. Instead, look to land an E route, then cast the W right on top of your opponent, using your passive to pull them towards you right before the route wears off. This combo ensures W hits and gives you 2 soul fragments for your passive. This short trade is generally how your trading works with SWAIN in lane. because his cooldowns are pretty long, and he doesn't do well in extended fights. That is, until he gets his ult. Once you have that, SWAIN becomes a tanky, high damage monster, and while it's strong in the 2v2, it really shines in teamfights, where he can pretty much single-handedly wipe out an entire team if he's not focused down. And just like in lane, do your best to avoid teamfights in the mid to late game stages of the game without your ult, since, as I said, you're pretty much useless outside of your initial burst of damage without it. Our last bot lane carry is yet another AP champ, but with a totally different playstyle when compared to SWAIN. His turrets give him constant pushing power, but they aren't just there for CSing. They can also do a huge amount of damage over time, and if the enemy makes even a small mistake while trying to force all-ins, you can even turn 2v3s in your favour. Since most people underestimate the massive burst from landing your EW triggering 2 waves of lasers from your turrets. Your W gives you good poking power after you shove your enemies under the tower, but don't use your E the same way. Instead, sit on it until your opponents try to make a move, and then use it to slow or stun them as you run back, using the movement speed from your passive to retreat to safety. Your ult gives you options for different situations, but in general, you're going to be using ult turret for damage in extended fights, especially when the enemy team is diving in, or ult grenade if you need to engage a fight, add disruption to a team fight that's already happening, or just make a pick on an enemy. Ult W does a huge amount of burst damage, but it's less reliable than the other options and generally won't be used. Heimer does take some getting used to, and a lot of the learning curve is limit testing, knowing when you can turn a fight in your favour despite being outnumbered, and when it's a good time to actually retreat. Once you have Zhonya's done, you're especially annoying to deal with as you can drop your turrets and sit in stasis as the enemy team is melted by your little pets. If you can't quite wrap your head around this unique pick, one of our top tier coaches on ProGuides.com would be more than happy to help. Lulu dominated much of the end of Season 10, and with the recent Moonstone Renewer buffs, she's once again a top tier pick for support players. Her passive gives excellent harass, making her one of the best supports for trading auto for auto in lane, while it also gives pretty significant DPS to a high attack speed ally when she shields them in the late game. Q gives you a way to help fight for lane control as it gives good pushing power while also harassing the enemy laners through the wave, and in fights, the slow can be huge in peeling for your team, or helping to chase down an enemy. Using Q in conjunction with your E can let you cover huge distances as well. One clever trick that can get you kills on low HP enemies under tower is to use your E on a minion as you're walking away, and then use that minion to Q your unsuspecting enemy. It's such a sneaky, satisfying way to catch your opponent off guard. Oh look, it's just a cute little minion. Oh no, Lulu's Q has killed me. W is an incredibly broken ability, with the movement speed helping an ally engage fights, chase down enemies, or kite, while the attack speed enabling a hyper carry to pump out even more damage. Or you can use the polymorph to completely shut down an enemy no matter how fed they are. E, like W, gives you a few options. You can use the previously mentioned minion trick to land some Q poke, but most of the time you'll be using it to shield your ally from damage, or on an enemy if you're looking to play more aggressively. Lastly, your ult also comes with some choices. The general use is as a peeling tool, using the extra HP, knock up, and slow to help a caught out carry escape from a dangerous situation. But don't just sit on it if there's no threat to your carry. It can also be a great help to whatever engage you have on your team. It's not always about survivability. Sometimes it's best just to ult an ally to give them some extra disruption with their engage, enabling the rest of your team to get more damage off. Alistair has been struggling to get his horns into the top tier of support for a bit, and he's finally made it. His kit doesn't have a lot going on in terms of complexity, but sometimes simple is just best. His passive gives him and his lane partner some sustain, which is something you can't say about the other tank engaged supports. His Q and W can be used to peel for an ally in lane or in team fights, or alternatively can be comboed to start fights up. An Alistair Flash WQ combo is one of the few forms of instant AoE CC in the game and can easily set your team up to win the game. After your initial engage, use your E to ramp up to the empowered auto, adding even more CC to the mix of things. With the Zeke's convergence rework with the item update, all of this CC means you provide a lot of extra damage to your bound ally. And hey, crazy amount of CC aside, your ult also makes you a nearly unkillable tank, at least for a few seconds. But remember, this isn't a Tryndamere ult. You want to use it when you're going to be taking the biggest portion of damage, and not when you're at 5% HP. One notable thing with Alistair is you actually rush Moby Boots before you finish an item. This is because his roams are super effective. As long as you can get behind the enemy mid laner, you can almost guarantee you'll blow flash or set your own laner up for a kill. Either way, it gives your team a lead, so roam a lot, but only when it's a good time to do so. You don't want to completely abandon your ADC. That's how you get reports. Rounding out our list is Shaco. Yeah, no, that's right. Shaco is actually one of the best performing supports in the game at the moment. In fact, he has a better win rate in this role versus his main role, jungle, by a pretty good margin. While Shaco jungle looks to use his Q to go in and backstab his opponents, lane Shaco is pretty different. Most of the time, you're going to be setting up boxes all over the place, making the lane a minefield for your opponents to navigate. In a similar way to HEIMERDINGER, this makes jungle gank sometimes more trouble than it's worth for your enemies. Your E also gives you a way to poke out your enemies, with the slow also making it so your comet is guaranteed to hit. The name of the game is patience. As you slowly poke your opponent down, you're hoping that eventually they'll lose track of the boxes and go for an all-in. And this is where your Q comes in. You bait your opponent by letting yourself get low, then you Q away just before you're in danger of dying. If they're really hungry for the kill, they may even flash onto a box, getting instantly denied, while taking a pretty good chunk of damage in the process. And if they flash between two boxes, they'll be ping-ponged, while your ADC is free to dish out the damage. After you get your ult, it gets a lot harder for your opponents to make a move. For one, your ult cast can be used to dodge pretty much anything in the game, including things like Kate and even Karthus ults. If you time it right, and if your opponent attacks the wrong target, the clone's huge burst of damage and fear upon death is pretty much a guaranteed kill. Basically, Shaco's support pokes enough that he can't be ignored, but between his boxes and his clone, he also just can't be killed. Shaco excels at beating lanes that want to engage hard, but he can struggle a bit if your opponents take two super high range champs like Kate and Zyra, so consider banning out things like that. And that is it for our top 3 champs to main on 10.24. I hope you enjoyed the video, and thanks so much for watching. Remember to let us know which champ you think is the best hyper carry in the game at the moment in the comments below. I can't wait to see you back for the next video. Until then, good luck on the Rift, stay safe, and wash your hands.